everybody, my name is Emma and this is Emma Rosen Books, and today I'm going to review for you the super popular Save the Cat Writes a Novel. I will be also reviewing this on my blog, so I'll leave a link below in the description, and equally there's links to all my other stuff, so Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, all the things. And of course subscribe if you'd like to see more videos about books and writing. I'd love you to stick around and watch more videos in the future. So I have seen this book going around on YouTube and Instagram, on AuthorTube and Authorgram for a little while, and people talking about it, and I was very interested in what all the hype was about. So when it was my birthday last week, and my sister-in-law asked me what I would like for my birthday, I asked for writing books. So she bought me this one, and she also bought me this, The Writer's Idea Thesaurus by Fred White, which I heard being talked about on the Kristen Martin podcast, which I'll link below. It's called That Smart Hustle. That Smart Hustle. And I thought this sounded really good for if I was kind of stuck and just needed some ideas. I haven't really looked at this, I've only flicked through it. But this one I just dived straight into as soon as I got it. So, I really needed this because I was getting really stuck with my work in progress. I don't want to go into the details too much of what my book is about because I haven't revealed that yet because I'm not far enough into it. But it wasn't so much that I couldn't think of words to say or anything like that. It was just that the story wasn't working, and there were certain points of the story that I was stuck on because I didn't know what direction to go in. And it was just preventing me from being able to get any further because I didn't know where to go, and I needed some kind of inspiration, or that's what I thought I needed. It turned out actually what I needed was to think about story structure. So let me explain my background to writing a little bit because it will make more sense when I come to review this book. So I have written and published a book which is called Milk, and it's all about my experiences breastfeeding as well as everything I learnt about breastfeeding. The links are below to that if you'd like to take a look. And that is a mixture of experience and of factual research type non-fiction stuff. So when you're writing a non-fiction book, it's more about doing the research and presenting it in a cohesive way, and then obviously the non-fiction, the sort of experience stuff is written more or less chronologically. I do kind of group it into categories, so like sleep and weaning on solids. So there is a little bit of jumping backwards and forwards in time to kind of make the topics a little bit more separated, but other than that, it's pretty much chronological. So I didn't have to think about storytelling and creating tension and drama because it wasn't about that. It was about presenting real life experience. So totally different writing non-fiction. I didn't know that. I was just like, well, I've written a book, I'm going to write another one because, you know, I'm naive. The other thing to say is that I don't have any formal kind of education in literature. I studied English literature at school up to GCSE, and then I dropped it and never studied it at A-level. Although I was offered a place to do an English literature A-level, I always wanted to do creative writing and not study literature because I, at the time, didn't really understand how studying other people's work helped. So I totally dropped it because, yeah, I was always more interested in creating rather than analysing, and I used to feel that when I really went into the detail about analysing somebody else's work, it either spoilt it for me or I got really frustrated at the whole idea of the author meant this. Well, how do you know the author meant that? It might just be a total accident that the author did that and it happens to be a symbol of something, or, you know, I just didn't like making assumptions that the author did it on purpose, even though probably they did. So yeah, I totally stopped. My A-levels were very science-based. I studied biology, chemistry, maths, and I studied French, and although I did study a bit of French literature, I did one module on French literature where we studied Camus. And so I suppose you could say I had a little bit of stuff there. But then I did a degree in science, in marine biology. And then I worked as a science teacher. So again, there's no like literature background, and the only qualification that I can say I have towards being able to write a story, of being a storyteller, is that I read a lot. And so I think you assimilate to a certain degree how to tell a story and what you like and that kind of thing. But I've never really sat down and thought about how a story is structured to make it compelling and interesting and readable. And that was why I was struggling with my work in progress, because it was all over the place. It was a good story and good ideas, but it didn't have direction, and it didn't have drama because of the lack of direction. And yeah, that was why I was struggling, not because I was lacking the inspiration, which is what I initially thought. Anyway, so hopefully all of that makes it a little bit more sense when I'm talking about this book. So, sorry to start off by talking about myself. So, Save the Cat writes a novel. The last book on novel writing you'll ever need is based on a book by, I can't remember who the person is called. It's based on a book by Blake Snyder, who's a screenwriter who wrote Save the Cat, I don't know, the last book on screenwriting you'll ever need. And where he goes through how to write a screenplay, and that was super popular. So then Jessica Brody has adapted that, the same methodology, to it being about writing a novel. I have not read the screenwriting version of this book, but I'm very interested in the fact it came from that, because I talked about a book on my wrap-up. In fact, I'll go and get it. Oh, out of breath. I talked about in my wrap-up a couple of months ago this book, The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. And this talks about kind of the hero's journey and the structure of that idea. And this is written for screenwriters, but it's advertised for both screenwriters and for book writers. But it solely draws examples from film, which when I analyse this, though it's a great book, I didn't really go that deeply into it. What I felt was that I would have liked a few examples from writing other than screenwriting, although I understand that obviously Christopher Vogler comes from a screenwriting background, and that's why. So I find it interesting that this book initially started off as a concept to do with screenwriting, because there's obviously a lot of crossover between film and novels because it's all storytelling. Anyway, this, conversely, has examples solely from books. So that, for me, I found really helpful. And as I say, I mean, I just would have liked a few examples in here, not exclusively, because it makes sense that it did draw from film. Anyway, so yeah, this has been adapted so that it's about novel writing, which is nice that it's that specific. So what happens? Well, basically this book is a formula for how to write a novel, which initially, as it says, is going to be my reaction. My reaction was just like, oh, there's not a formula, it's my own work I'm creating. But as I read it, it does make sense. So initially it talks about how you create your main character. What does a main character need to be interesting? So it says that the character needs to have something that they want, something that they need, and needs to have character flaws. We don't want to read about somebody perfect. Go through lots of examples of how those things are created within certain characters. So then once you've got your main character and you've established what do they want, what do they need, what are their character flaws, it then goes into the story. It's called a beat sheet, so the 15 beats that are required in a story. So using that character's wants and needs, those feed into this particular structure, and that structure takes the form of 3 acts. So the first act kind of establishes the story. In the second act, the main character begins to pursue their wants, which then leads them into pursuing their needs, and then that ends with Act 3, which is your finale, where they have changed. And all of that is explained really, really clearly in very easy to understand language, and in a very readable, like fun way. So it's not a really heavy book or anything like that. It's very understandable and very clear about why this formula works, and although you can switch around elements of those beats, so you could do this beat before that beat, or you know, but why it works in the order that it does, and why you need to hit those beats, and why that makes the story compelling, makes people not be able to put the book down. Then it goes through 10 different genres, so not in terms of like horror, crime, thriller, romance, but in terms of type of story. So for example, there's Why Done It and Monster in the House and Rites of Passage, and talks about how each of those genres has certain elements that it needs. So for example, Monster in the House, which generally horror films are part of that genre, films, books, and within a Monster in the House type story, you're going to need a monster, but you also need a house. Because if you think about it, every horror book has not necessarily a house, but something that means that the people who are being attacked by the monster are stuck and can't get away from it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a house, it can be a metaphorical house. So the fact that they are somehow bonded to this monster, or the monster is after them, or and then there also needs to be a sin. So the main character needs to have done something that means that in a way they kind of deserve it, which makes that story much more exciting and interesting. So it's just an example of how it works through the genres, and said, okay, you hit the 15 beats, but you also need to have these points if you're writing this kind of story. And that's essentially it. It just makes it really, really clear and understandable. What it also does for each genre is go through a example. So with the Monster in the House one, it goes through Misery, and it goes through the plot of Misery, and it tells you where each beat is and how that's constructed. And that was super interesting. Now, the issue, of course, is that that means it contains spoilers, and I think of all the books that it does that for, all 10 of them. So the 10 books that this references, I hadn't read many of them, which did mean that I was torn between not reading it, particularly if it was a book that I'm interested in reading in the future, thinking, well, I don't want to read their example because then that means that I can't really read that book because I know what happens. But then I decided, no, actually, I'd rather kind of learn the lessons of how they're going through the plot. So that's really the only downside to this book, actually, is the fact that it contains spoilers for novels. It then, at the end of the book, talks about, once you've got all of that structured, how you use all of that in your beat sheet and all the information that you've created to build a logline and a synopsis in a very formulaic way. Personally, I probably would not follow it exactly, but I think that it's a very... It makes sense how they've constructed it, but you definitely as a writer could play with what they've done to make sure that you include the information that they suggest that you include, but restructure it so that it's not clearly like a Save the Cat logline, if that makes sense. This book I have found so helpful. So one of the issues I was struggling with is that the character needed to do something that was going to be really pivotal, but I didn't know what it was. And once I realised how the story needed to flow around the main character's wants and needs, it made it clear what that pivotal thing needed to be, because I knew what realm it had to be and how it couldn't just be anything in the whole world, but it had to be relevant to the main character's wants and needs. And I know that that kind of stuff probably sounds really obvious to a lot of people, but like I said, this is why I wanted to give you my kind of history. I don't know anything about story structure. I don't understand really how a book is written. I didn't realise that I didn't know, but I didn't. And as I say, other than kind of understanding, because I've read a lot, how a story is told, I hadn't really ever analysed the fact that in fact storytelling is pretty much always the same, and yet they do hit these beat points that are mentioned in here. Successful ones do, not every book does, but the really, really successful ones often do. And because of that, it did really help me to see why my story wasn't working. So I am actually going to follow, not to the letter, but I'm going to follow the structure in here because I really like it. It makes total sense to me. It's really clear. I think it will make my story really, really comprehensive, and I think it will make my story flow better. And it just sorted it all out. I really recommend that you do give this book a look, and I'd be really interested in what other people think. I think if you are like me, struggling with putting your story together, and like I said, I thought it was lack of ideas, but actually it was lack of understanding the formula of a story, or the structure, that's the word I'm looking for, of a story. You know, if you're in that position, if you're feeling a bit stuck, it's worth having a read, because you realise what point of the story you're at and why you're stuck and where the story needs to go. So I really recommend it for that. I think whatever point you're at, if you are still at the ideas stage, and this might really help you to concentrate the ideas that you already have and realise which ones could make a really good story arc. Or whether you're nearly finished with a book but you're not quite happy with it, this might help you to sort of rearrange things. Or there were certain points for me, like my main character actually didn't have enough going wrong for her to make it that interesting, because her life was alright and she needed to be a bit more interesting than she was. It's that kind of thing. It just really, really helped me to clarify things. So I really would recommend it if you are thinking of or are writing a book. It's really good. If you have any kind of literature education, I'd be so interested in what you think and whether you look at this differently because you know a bit more. I don't know. But as I say, for me, it was so, so helpful. As I say, I'll be talking about this book on my blog, so if you want to, then you can head over there. Please do like if you did. I'd love you to leave comments about what you think about this book, or recommendations for other books about the writing craft, because I would love my comment section to be a useful tool for other people who are looking at this video. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos about reading and writing, and I will see you all for my next one. Bye!